We went up and Eddie Benton took a stick and sang a little song there and gave me the stick, and I went up and I didn't know how to sing, but I hit the drum a couple times. What a beautiful drum. And he turned that over to us. And we started learning all the songs, all the prayers, all the ceremonies right there in that prison. And Eddie Benton got out about 6 months before me. If we can change people's lives, if we get people off from alcohol and drugs, turn their whole life around, get them to go into skilled and technical trades, get them to go back to the university through correspondence courses. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that out in the streets? So that's the idea that we took out of prison. And for 4 years we went to all the Indian organizations trying to get them to create a culture program, a spiritual program. So all they were doing is giving out food baskets, little sewing groups. Nobody was dealing with police brutality, the dual system justice, poor housing, high dropout rate of our children, a rip-off of our Indian children through the welfare system. Nobody was dealing with those problems. And we talked to them about it, they just laughed at us. Oh, a bunch of ex-convicts, they're going to come out and tell us what to do. And so we started formulating our own organization. Called it simply the Concerned Indian American Coalition. And after months of organizing, after months of going into homes and knocking on doors, our people were beaten down so far, beaten down so low, they didn't believe that anything could ever happen again. It was all over for us. And finally we had a meeting, the black riot torn side of North Minneapolis. And only about 120 Indian people showed up. And about 80% of them were women. Were women who suffer the most. Who suffer the most because they don't have a husband. They don't have nobody to help them. They get pregnant and have a baby and the man's gone. And they have to deal with that. They have to deal with the courts and juvenile court and the foster system and poor housing and poor health conditions. I was a first-class engineer when this movement formed. I was the only so-called felon Indian working in a major corporation in Minneapolis. I was a first-class engineer when this movement formed. But I had all this stuff boiling up inside of me, what I saw and what I witnessed all my life. The police brutality, the poor housing, the poverty, all the discrimination that was going on. So I went to that meeting that we organized. And I was nominated because I spoke like I'm doing today. I spoke about these conditions passionately. I talked about my mother and my father, what they did to them. Because when I talked about my mother and I talked about my father, I talked about every Indian in America. I talked about my mother finally breaking down one day and telling me why she couldn't walk, why her legs would swell up. It was the story of every Indian mother in America. Every time she got caught speaking Indian, they'd give her a little toothbrush and a little pail of water, and she scrubbed the floors on her hands and knees, clean out the urinals, clean out the toilets. When all the other children were running that gave up their language and culture and buckled into the church and the government, she was being punished. And she told me, after the movement formed, telling me I had to forget about the past, think about I always wondered why she did that. Tell us to go to school, study hard, forget about the language. She was doing that to protect us. Toward the end, they tied sacks of marbles on her knees. Not just her, hundreds and thousands of our mothers, our aunties, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our uncles. They did the same thing to them every time they got caught speaking Indian. And I knew that when she told me that story, I could never turn around again. I could never turn back. We had to continue to move forward. And I got up that day and I spoke. They nominated me to be the chief, the chairman, they call it, chairman of this Concerned Indian American Coalition. And I got up and I spoke pretty passionately, they said. And I got 90% of the vote. I was able to work out a deal with Northern States Power Company. They put me on a paid 1-year leave of absence, paid. Because that's what they were doing to black people back then in the civil rights movement. They were paying black leaders to go out in the community and form the urban coalitions, the urban leagues, and civil rights departments. And my people demanded the same respect. That Northern States Power Company released me for 1 year with pay to become the leader of this great movement. I left that institution. And when I talked, they said, well, how are we going to do this? There's just a few of us. 15,000 Indian people living here, 6 months of organizing, only 120, mostly women and children showed up. And I coined a phrase right there. I said, we'll do it through confrontation politics. We'll go knock on the door of the BIA. They'd open the door, we'd knock a little bit louder. If they didn't open the door, then we would knock the door down. And we would go in and demand what is rightfully ours. And we knew that 75% of all the energy resources left in America was still on our land. Huh? Because we made a statement that we never give up another inch, another ounce of our land without struggle. And if necessary, we'd put our lives right on the line for what we believed in. Confrontation politics. When I told a little crowd there what we were going to do, about half of them were almost knocking one another over trying to get out the door. And that's what we have done ever since. We looked at education. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the federal government, white European education, and organized religion as the three worst enemies of Indian people. They work day in and day out to strip us of our language, strip us of our culture. Don't talk about our contributions. Don't talk about the fact that medical science hasn't come up with a medicine yet that Indian people didn't have used in practice. They never talk about the food that we consumed right here today. 70% of all the food that's consumed in the world is grown by Indian people. They didn't talk about the fact that Indian people, and I saw it with my own eyes when I was down in Teotihuacan 3 years ago, that Indian people were practicing brain surgery while the Spaniards were still living in caves over in Europe. They never tell our young people about the pyramids, which are sacred sites to people down south. They don't call them pyramids. They have a pyramid called the Sun Pyramid that's 3 times larger than any pyramid they find along the Nile. Built 300 years before the Roman Empire. How come they don't teach our children? You know why? Because it would make a lie out of them in their curricula and the whole education system to teach the truth about our people. That's why we started our own survival school system. We teach our young people about the way we live, the way we govern ourselves. In Teotihuacan, they have a water channel comes into a city where 280,000 people lived in a modern metropolis at one time. And they pulled the slabs up about twice as wide as the chair, and they showed me where the water came in. And there was viaduct into every home, every apartment building in Teotihuacan. And when it went back onto that main channel and out of the city, the farmers would come in and separate the feces from the urine and the water. And they used that to fertilize their gardens. And that flow, fresh, clean, powerful medicine of Mother Earth called water continued to flow for hundreds, thousands of years, while the Spaniards were still living in caves over in Europe. How come they didn't teach our children? When I went to school, they tried to convince me that on the blackboard there, and we had one big blackboard in our classroom. On this side was the American flag, and over here was some guy in high-heel, little black patent leather shoes. He had on white nylons, little breeches, little ruffled shirt, blonde wig, rouge on his cheeks. They try to tell me that that's the father of my country.